Welcome. Welcome to memoQ's Life Sciences Roundtable Discussion, Volume 2. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I, along with my colleague Ulrich Fricke, will be moderating today's event. We're going to start off with a discussion related to the use of structured content in life sciences, and then we're going to touch on some of the best practices related to content creation, readability, translation workflows. We're going to get an update on some of the different document types that are needed to be created and translated these days. We're going to look at some of the regulatory requirements regarding lay summaries, post-market surveillance, and readability. And then if we have time, we're going to look at some of the tools and technologies that are increasingly being used by companies in the life sciences space. Now, I'm very happy to introduce and welcome our two panelists. Both of them have a tremendous amount of industry experience, but also very deep subject matter expertise. First off, we have Barbara Peralta, who is the Director of Life Science Solutions at Acolad. Just previously was at Amplexer, but Amplexer was acquired by Acolad. Barbara brings 15 years of experience focused on language and content services for the life sciences industry. Her experience at Amplexer and now Acolad includes life sciences operations, account management, solution development, and pre-sale support. We also have Regina Lynn Preciado, who is a senior content strategist for Content Rules. Regina is a structured content and reuse strategy expert with experience in information modeling, enterprise content management, and component-based authoring. And she works with some of the largest high-tech life sciences, manufacturing, and financial services companies globally. Also, just to mention that Regina was the co-author of just a superb white paper called The Pharma Content Evolution, Content Reuse and Automation. I highly recommend that if you haven't read this, but you want to know like what's going on with structured content and why it's becoming increasingly common in life sciences. Before I jump into the discussion, maybe Regina, could you, just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, could you tell us a little bit about, what is information modeling in the context of what we're discussing, enterprise content management, and component-based authoring? Just give us a quick definition so that we're using the right terms.
Right. To sum up 30 years, no. Information modeling, quick definition would be developing the standards and structures to ensure that all of your information is consistent and therefore findable, accessible, interoperable across systems and reusable. And when I say information, that includes narrative content, sentences, paragraphs, and data values. So that's of particular interest to life sciences, of course, because there's so much content and data having to come together. And with by modeling your information, developing structures and standards, there's a lot of power in being able to automate that bringing together of content and data for various reasons: information exchange, publishing documents, pulling together submissions, etc.
Excellent. And I don't know if maybe we can just talk a little bit before we get into the discussion, just a little bit further in terms of definition. If we talk about structured content, maybe you can explain a little bit about what that is. I just want to make sure that we're all speaking the same language here.
Yes. So structured content is, it's funny, I think of it as we're turning content into a set of building blocks so that we can assemble any type of information product that we need. I'm introducing more terms here. So when we structure content, we typically chunk it into small components, small building blocks that you can then assemble in different ways to create different content products. And it is all based on typically a technology to allow all this to happen. Typically, it could be XML. There's other technologies that structure the content. So depending on whether you are coming in from a techie, the technology side, and thinking, oh, XML, content management systems, APIs and automation, or if you're coming in from a content or data side where you have a source of truth that can then provide that information wherever that information is needed. It's all about a consistent set of building blocks of content.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I think that helps so that when we get into the discussion, we'll kind of understand when we use these terms, what it actually means. Barbara, I'd kind of like to start the discussion off with you and you, Regina. Every time I ask a question, feel free to jump in as well. But what are you seeing in terms of general trends with content reuse in life sciences industries?
Yeah, I think in life sciences, there's been a growing need for management of content in a more sophisticated way, largely due to changing regulations. And I'm glad Regina mentioned data, because there's a lot of data coming in that affects content or information that is being distributed either to patients, clinicians, healthcare providers, et cetera. And so all of that is driving the customers that we work with to start looking at managing their content in different ways and new ways. For them, new ways. Content management, structured content has been around for a long time, but I think the complexity of the growing regulations, the growing volume, and the amount of data that's coming in that's driving change to that content is requiring our customers to look at structured content management as a means to get a handle of all of that.
Okay, would you mind giving like a specific example of how a customer is
Yes, there's many to choose from. The recent MDR, IVDR regulation in the EU has generated new content that needs to be managed. SSCP and SSP quality documentation, a lot of labeling that needs to be updated, and an increased focus on clinical evaluation and post-market surveillance that will generate a lot of new data that will be analyzed and that will drive change. It will drive change not only to the content that a service provider like Acolad deals with that has to get translated, but other documentation, other pieces of content that needs to be updated, and all of them need to be aligned. The SSCP and the SSP are quality reporting that has to be submitted to the EU database, and other quality reporting and technical documentation that has to be maintained as part of the post-market surveillance plan. That all of these documents and all of this content has to be aligned and has to be driven by that same information, that same data, all to provide transparency and to provide patient safety to the end patient.
Excellent. And I see, Regina, you're nodding in agreement. I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Are you seeing similar or having similar conversations and seeing similar trends?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I could
Well,
go on,
let me ask you.
but yes. I was just thinking about this too, and Barbara, with your expertise in localization and the global impact of this, you can take a very simple example. We need to standardize one term. Well, where do we use that term? How many languages do we use that term in? Maybe it's not a translated term. Maybe it's the generic name of the molecule or something like that. And I don't want to say that nobody knows, but nobody knows where it's used. And there's this massive, you have to change it, you have to update it, you have to comply. And so there's just this massive search and trying to automate that or throw more people at it or whatever. And when you have a good, solid, structured content strategy, we were talking about enterprise strategy, and that's, across silos, across the whole company, which you cannot implement all at once, just to reassure you. We start and then we move out to other silos. But just the ability to know where the information is, where the source of truth is, and the impact of any of these updates, and then to be able to make them, whether it's human manual effort, programmatically, a combination of both. That this is something I was in a big conversation about yesterday, so it's top of mind. But yeah, everything Barbara said is As you might expect, right on,
Spot on. Yeah.
from what I'm encountering. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, because I mean, you both mentioned, information in silos in, different departments. And I'm assuming, I'm not assuming, I've read this and we've discussed this before, that there's a lot of duplication of efforts. And the issue with that is, one, you have a duplication of effort. So you have costs and time sunk into creating this, the reinventing the wheel multiple times. At the same time, you risk having content that is not consistent, right? So you're using different terms, different ways to explain things, and you need that consistency oftentimes. But companies being companies, they have these silos and people have their, their areas of responsibility. How do you go in, and let's start with Regina, and initiate a conversation, either as an external consultant or as an internal stakeholder? And then Barbara, I'd like you to explain how do you actually carry that on through not just the content creation, but also the translation element. So Regina.
Right. So at Content Rules, we talk about our 5 dimensions of content standardization. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the 5 dimensions of content standardization are, I can rattle this off: words, sentences, paragraphs, components, that's the building blocks, and then the output types, which are your, documents and things. So wherever we come in, we can help with start the conversation around whatever sort of level or dimension that particular silo is most interested in. And we start talking about the different relationships among these dimensions, and where they are in their current information modeling will help us know where to help them. If they haven't started at all, we have a methodology that is proven, but if they've started, we don't go back and start over. We help people where they are. So we can start the conversation based on the problem that got big enough that caused a silo to reach out for help. My advice there would be, don't wait till it's so big, reach out for help sooner. But, people are people, and we all think we've got it handled. So from there, we start working with standards, models, taxonomy, metadata, whatever standard we need to put in place at the time. And we always build with the team a strategy that we can iterate. So each silo or each new set of information that's coming in, we can go faster as we go, because we've set some standards that we can build on. We have a foundation we can build on. And
can you give us
yeah.
Can you give a specific example of a silo or a department or team that was able to collaborate with another team, reduce the duplication of effort, and then what type of documents or content were they sharing that content for?
Right. So one project that I've been involved with is looking at content reuse. So that's having a building block of content that you can author somewhere and use that same content without change in different places. And we've been really looking at where we can reuse from clinical reports, such as a clinical study report, which contains a lot of data, a lot of information that, as we all know, then has to be brought into labels and lay summaries and educational materials. I mean, the results of clinical trial, that information is used throughout a whole lot of content. And so we looked at how can we structure a clinical study report. Let me take a more specific example, the safety section, and how can we structure that content so we can reuse it appropriately in a summary of clinical safety or in safety sections of the USPI, just as an example. And part of that is determining, how small are your building blocks, how big, the more information you have, the less reusable it is, but what has to be reused, what has to travel along in the reuse. So there's a lot of decisions to make. Once you make them, you have principles for the next set of content. And Barbara, I can hand that off to you too, because especially as I talk about labeling, that really hits the globalization and localization piece.
Right.
Thank you.
And we usually start our conversations with customers at that labeling place. We're usually working with the packaging and labeling group. And sometimes that group is within regulatory, sometimes it's within quality. but you're correct, there are silos. And so we start by working with the group that's needing our language services, let's say, and then we work with them to develop ROIs, to help them to develop ROIs on where they could benefit from structured content, and then expand from there where we can. It's easier if you can get a champion somewhere within the global organization that can then pull together people from quality, regulatory, packaging and labeling, marketing, so that you can get the biggest bang for your buck, let's say, with your structured content approach. But for us, it starts with labeling, because that's traditionally who we work with. But we see the big picture. We're touching content all over the organization. And so we get exposed to where these synergies could surface. And so we always look for ways that we can introduce the idea of structured content, because traditional tools, the traditional tools that we have at hand, TMS, terminology management, they just aren't equipped to handle the complexity and the volume and the multiple ways through which the information is being delivered. So this is why we're big advocates of structured content and helping our customers to realize the benefits of such an approach.
Awesome.
Yeah, you know what? I wanted to add to that because you mentioned having a champion and how important that is. And I was thinking too, in the structuring the content, we'll say sometimes upstream from labeling is we develop a set of standards and structures. And so now there is something outside of the people to point to. So you can get it, if you have a champion, this is excellent. And those people who champion this can say, look, we have a set of standards, and yes, your proposal is also good. Does it match our standards and principles that we have adopted and we are adopting? And so having that non-personal, or, you know, that sort of external thing to look at, as humans, we start to understand that even if we have to go to the level of, well, the tool doesn't do it, you know, but people understand. And so to Barbara's point, having the champion and then having that set of principles to guide you makes a big difference as you're expanding from one pilot project into something like global labeling.
And the silos could be complex. It could be different departments, but it could also be regional. On the pharma side, often the labeling is done by the local operating companies in country, and there is often not a corresponding English version of that labeling that's out in the market. So there's been a lot of work with many of our clients to just understand what's out there and what are the risks. And this effort has also resulted in us thinking, you know, you could be doing this differently through structured content and managing it and eliminating or reducing significantly all of that risk.
When we talk about structured content in the initial content creation, how does that affect workflows when then you go on to localizing or translating into multiple languages?
Well, I think for us, we look at integration of systems. So as customers implement structured content and CMS systems, we look to integrate those systems with our own systems, with our own TMS systems, so that the workflow is efficient and streamlined. And not just integration with CMS systems, but also integration with other systems like Viva or Master Control, so that the whole end-to-end process is streamlined and efficient. We don't want a lot of human beings kind of managing, moving from one system to the next to get information and content and output generated. And so integration through API is key to our strategy for making this kind of solution possible for our customer.
Okay. I'm going to come back to tools and technology a little bit later, but Regina, when you're working with a company and they're looking at, okay, yeah, we got to create this content, but ultimately it's going to be going into multiple languages. How does that affect the actual initial source content creation? Does that?
I'm glad you asked, and
Okay.
I bet Barbara is too, and everyone. So the more consistent that your source content is, the more accurate your translations will be. And consistency in the source content applies at all 5 of our dimensions of content standardization. I'm starting as small as the terminology. If you're using clinical trial terminology, there can be a meaningful difference between words such as patient, participant, volunteer, subject. I don't know that I see subject very often, but those have different meanings. But it's pretty easy over the course of years and dozens of authors writing in things to drift from your terminology here and there. And then, of course, when it goes out to be translated or localized, we have all these different words. Do they mean different things? Was it just a momentary lapse of terminology? So just that, I won't get into the sentence and paragraph and et cetera level. The one reason content reuse is so powerful in this content is we have a long history of copy, paste, and tweak. Copy, paste, adjust the content. Copy, paste, take this out, add this thing. And a lot of that is because we're copying, pasting large blocks of content that do not all apply to where we need it. So we have to modify it. Every time that happens, you now have 2 sources of truth with some overlapping information. You have differences in writing styles and standards. Sometimes you have differences in terminology. We, at Content Rules, we call this content drift. And the more content drift you have, the less accurate as a whole your content is in both its source language and its localized languages. So if you can fix it at the source, it makes it makes everything else more accurate, better quality, less expensive, because you're translating that piece one time rather than multiple times. So
Thank you. And I'm learning, I'm taking notes as we go here. And I love the idea of content, or the phrase content drift, and also the momentary lapse of terminology. That's awesome. Reminds me of a song.
Right, because nobody does it on purpose.
Right.
That's the thing. Everybody is trying to create the most accurate, the most consistent content that we can. Most of us, we have places to look up the terminology. We try to memorize it. We have styles. So it is, despite that, you have a lot of people working on things. And so there just will be drift.
Barbara, how do you suggest managing, because readability is incredibly and increasingly important, right? For especially there's very specific document types and the target audience. So what are some of the best practices related to maintaining the readability standards, again, across multiple languages? I mean, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think it starts with source.
Okay.
Getting the source to be at the right readability level. And we can help with that, either doing a linguistic analysis of that source before we start translation to validate that it's at the right readability level. And then after that, because we're dealing with multiple languages and there are different tools for different languages, and then maybe not some tools for some languages, we have a variety of processes in place to make sure that our translations are at the reading level as well, which includes things like making sure that we have a review by a layperson, back translation if we need to do that, and then harmonization with that back translation against the source. And so there are processes and tools that we use in combination to make sure that that we have the right readability. But if I could, Mark, I'd like to go back to something that Regina said about consistency. I think that one of the things that we recognize and use content management and structured content authoring for is to manage where we have to have necessary deviation. And some of that is localization for consumer products, for example, we need to have very specific localizations for each region or country. And so if we can assemble a piece of labeling and pull the information that's unique to that country or region through the system, that makes that process a lot easier. That same goes for regulatory information. There may be information that's necessary in the China market that's not necessary in the EU and vice versa. And so being able to tag content at that level and then pull it as needed for a product by country makes the process a lot more streamlined and a lot less risky.
So having that market specific and domain specific knowledge is really, really important in working with somebody. One more question on this topic. When you're working with linguists, is it more of a coaching them? Okay, if we talk about readability, for example, that's not a direct translation. Some linguists, they want to make the most beautiful translation, but it might not be the most readable, right? Especially if we're talking about lay summaries or something like that. Is this something that you have to coach with the linguist, or do you have special linguists that focus on for example, lay summaries, or is it a tool-driven process where the tool kind of limits the terminology use, the length of sentences, things like that? And either one of you, please, Regina or Barbara.
It's really a combination. So we do have training for our linguists when we're for those who are doing lay summaries to make sure that first, as I said, we try to make sure that the source is at the appropriate level, and then we translate as close to that source as possible. But we also make sure that those who are reviewing and editing these documents know what the purpose is of the lay summary and understand what their role is in the review of that document. So it's a combination of tools and training of our linguists.
Excellent.
Yes.
Regina, did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Yeah, because just to add to that, at Content Rules, we have a whole service line of content optimization, and that is optimizing content for readability, comprehension, translatability, reading level, those sorts of things. And we have tools that we offer our customers. We have tools we use in-house that can look at the language at a scale that, again, humans can't, and pop up, here's your inconsistencies. Hey, do we want to use, okay, I'm going to set off a little war here in the participants about the Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma. Use it or not? Well, if you're going to use it everywhere. If you're not going to use it, then don't use it everywhere. Please use it. These are wars that can keep copy editors going for decades, by the way. But so software to find all of those things and help you harmonize and get everything consistent in a way that you just can't do. It would take too many humans to look at that volume of content. And once you have more than 3 humans, it's very hard to stay consistent on everything. So since you did ask about tools, there are several content optimization tools on the market for various purposes and levels. And we're familiar with most of them. I guess I won't say all of them. Maybe we are. I am familiar with most of them.
Well, I'm imagining that your Twitter account is going to be blown up with all these copywriters who are like, no to the Oxford comma, or
or yes to the Oxford comma, which is
I'm a yes to the Oxford comma, actually.
Yay.
The murky underworld of. So let me ask you this. Let's just jump tracks a little bit, and both of you can jump in on this. What regulations? And this can be across markets, industries, whatever, but what regulations right now are top of mind in terms of, hey, you know what, these regulations, these requirements are going to force companies to change or do something new or different?
I'd say the big one is MDR, IVDR in the EU, because they just went into effect the last couple of years. And so most companies have their labeling updated, but it's not a one and done deal. As I said, higher or more focus on post-market surveillance. So there's still work to be done, and clinical evaluation, and then managing all of that. And now is the time for med device and IVD manufacturers to start thinking about doing things differently as they get ready for the future under MDR and IVDR. Other countries are implementing similar regulations that, while not completely aligned with MDR, IVDR, they're all moving in the same direction. On the pharma side, the new CTR 536 2014 regulation that went into effect this year is driving some change, more centralization around the whole clinical trial submission process, and the implementation and enactment of the plain language summaries or lay summaries. And so those are the key ones that are impacting us in localization as we support our customers in getting compliant to these new regulations.
You mentioned that companies are going to have to start doing things differently. Can you give a specific example of, what?
Well, yeah, there's going to be more data through post-market surveillance that's driving change. So change management. For medical device companies, it's been a little bit loosely defined under MDR, under the previous MDD directive. Now it's a regulation, and it's more robust for both medical device and IVD manufacturers. And so a lot of data will be driving change through these organizations, and they'll have to be assessing the impact of those changes, the risks, and then updating content, updating labeling, updating technical documentation and quality reporting. It's as I said, it's not enough just to update your labeling and call it done. It's going to be an ongoing process that will require more robust change management and content management.
Thank you. Regina, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'm seeing too, the governance can be such a scary word, so we may need to come up with a different word, but governance, your content governance is a driver actually for some of this move to structure. Some of the people I'm talking to are like, yeah, content reuse is great. Components that we can use as building blocks, that's great. What we really need is workflows and governance at this level in order to see where is that information throughout the body of content in a level of granularity that you do not get from a document management system managing PDFs or big long documents. So we're really looking at, I had a conversation last week about is it CFR 21 compliance, which is signatures. I'm just going to leave it at that. I'm sure everyone knows that, but at a component level, not just a full document level. And what does it mean if you move to a component-based structured content management system may need to be certified as compliant with various regulations, including CFR 21. So building in that kind of change management of the humans, change management and change controls on the content and the relationships so you can find it and make sure you've gotten everywhere you need to get is a big driver right now. I think in the past we were looking at other, reuse and automation, and now this is coming up in a lot of conversations. And I honestly can't say, is it coming up in a lot of conversations with me now because I'm moving into other silos, or is it coming up because it's a newer concern as you move to a new way of doing content? You start to see all the manual processes that you're doing that could be handled as part of the content lifecycle.
Do you have organizations, or do you work with organizations that have well, you mentioned champions, you mentioned governance, I guess compliance fits in there. Who in the organizations has the responsibility of ensuring that the content meets the regulatory guidelines?
Those people.
It's not my job, it's your job, right? Somebody else is going to take care of it. Barbara, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a combination of regulatory, quality, labeling. I mean, they all collaborate. Sometimes well, sometimes not so well, but yes, it's a number of different groups within an organization.
Okay.
And that is a change when you go to a component-based structured content, and you can have official approvals and sign-offs at just this piece of information that I own, and then just that piece of information that Barbara owns is a not quite the right term, but is responsible for. That is a layer that we haven't had in this industry before, I think, of connecting very closely in a system. We've seen it in other industries, getting the approvals to that level, and there's still usually someone who has to look at the whole, the whole compilation of it as well to sign off. But it just, however it's done in longer documents, is not as crisp as what you can do when you go to structure.
Technology is always evolving very, very quickly. And what are some of the, well, let's start with must-haves in terms of technology for content creation and translation and maintaining those regulatory requirements for readability, et cetera. And so what is it, like a baseline must-have? And then maybe you can add like, hey, this is a really cool use of, for example, maybe AI or machine learning or something like that. Please, either or both of you, any thoughts?
I can start if you want. So I would say, and especially to your point of going on to machine learning, AI, intelligent automation, natural language generation, etc. You've got to standardize and structure your content first to train the machines to do all the things. And I think we've seen different proofs of concepts and initiatives not get the results that they hoped for, mainly because people didn't realize they needed to change how they do content in order for those technologies to give the results. So I would say, starting out, a component-based content management system that can scale. It's not that everybody has to work in the same system. You can connect different repositories in different ways. Typically, I recommend XML-based if possible. Ideally, for scale, again, a content optimization, one of those options, and I want to say a publishing system, but that's not really what I mean. A way to compile and generate all the various types of outputs from this repository of building blocks of content. It may need to go into your RIM system. It may need to go over to a localization system and so on. But you need some way to get that content out of the repository into different, could be documents, could be web pages, could be a mobile app, could be a chatbot, could be voice assistant, could be electronic health records. Wherever that information needs to go, you need those connectors to get it and put it there.
Excellent. Barbara, do you want to add anything to that?
Mark, I forgot what the first part of your question was.
Oh, just, what are some must-haves in terms of the technology and tools to use for both the content creation and the localization in terms of, automating, leveraging, and then reusing content, but also meeting those regulatory guidelines for readability, for example? Because I know there are readability tools, but can you integrate that? And I mean, what's some must-haves? And then what are some really new cool applications, if any, that you're seeing in terms of AI or MT or NLP, et cetera?
Yeah, I think for us, it's all about connectivity of the various systems. Because our customers have so many systems, and here we are talking about implementing content management systems on top of it, but they've already got regulatory information systems, Viva systems, electronic clinical trial systems. There's just a plethora of systems out there that our customers could and are using. And so having a way to integrate those systems, perhaps reduce redundancies, and making sure that those systems talk to our systems. And for us, it's using AI, using MT, having the MT, TM, CAT tools, TMS, all of that fully integrated so that we're not handling things. Things are moving in an efficient workflow, in a smart and intelligent way from one system to the next, so that we can deploy the best MP engine for that document type, for that language pair, in a streamlined and efficient manner, and then apply TM terminology tools, readability tools, etc., on top of that as well. And so for us, it's all about connecting all of that cool stuff together so that we're not manually doing this stuff with standalone kind of technology.
Yes, and the standards, as we know, standards are what make things work together. So when we talk about content standards in the source and the creation of source, that is one of the ultimate goals of standardization. It's not just, oh, good, we have terminology that humans understand. It is, as the information travels around, it can all fit and make sense. And I'm thinking this is one reason, Barbara, to your point of we already have all these systems, and now we're over here talking about other systems, that having a strategy before the system, and I don't mean before you buy a new system, it could be existing systems that you configure in a different way. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to handle it, but having a strategy becomes really important, because what will happen is you'll look at your system and it will have features, and so you start wanting to use the features, and so you'll develop workflows. You'll accidentally develop workflows and process around what the system can do, even if that's not the best thing for achieving the goals. Another thing I see a lot, and not just life sciences, in all industries, it's all of us as humans, we look at new systems or new ways of using our systems, and where we sort of either on purpose or by accident replicate our current processes. So we go, okay, well, we need the sign off. So how are we going to do the sign off? And we need to build a customization. And now we have another thing to integrate and so on. Well, maybe you need to do sign off in a totally different way that is more along the lines of what we're all talking about here, of maintaining that metadata and the structures, and that information moves along with the content and the data. And so taking that time, everyone wants to jump ahead to the really cool, fun stuff,
Yes.
AI, but taking that time to know, like, what do we have? What do we want to do? Are there better ways to do what we want to do now that the technology has matured, the methodologies are proven? Barbara's working on a localization at scale that many companies never even have to think about. So
makes a ton of sense. And Barbara, I'm glad that you mentioned TM, because I don't get paid unless somebody says translation memory or cat tool. Okay, so
it's still a critical part of our process. So
yeah, it's huge.
It has to be fully integrated into everything that we do.
But let me ask you this, because you're talking about dealing with a lot of sensitive data and content, and you're talking about manual processes, but whenever possible, automate. But even with automation, you do have privacy and security concerns. Okay, and what are some best practices or concerns that you're seeing? And we'll start with Barbara and then come back to Regina.
Yeah, I think we do a lot of adverse event translations, and some of this stuff can come through handwritten and PDF, non-editable PDF, and so it requires that we do stuff the old-fashioned way, especially for security and GDPR compliance. We have to look at it and redact. If the client isn't redacting information before we get it, then we have to do it. And so some of that can't be done, especially if you're getting a handwritten report or something like that, can't easily be done completely in an automated fashion. So we try to use technology and automation as much as possible, but it's still very much a human process, and in parts of the process, or with certain document types or certain content. And so humans are still very actively involved in this process. We still use human translators, especially in life sciences. We cannot just rely on automation and machines to do the work for us. There's too much at risk.
Excellent.
Agreed. And that's where, when we're looking at automation, we're looking at automating content reuse or automating compiling content. You can automate to a certain extent redaction, but that depends on everything being tagged properly and all that, so it needs to be checked, etc. So we look at not wasting valuable medical writer and subject matter expert time formatting a document. You know, we're looking at things that make sense to get the scale that we can get through automation. We don't come in and start with, ooh, how do we take, you know, every single thing that we have to do, and the AI will just take care of it, because
Right.
we have these concerns in regulatory. And so, you know, maybe in 5 years, when everything else is consistent and the content is standardized in all 5 dimensions and everything's kind of going along, maybe we'll look at that point and go, all right, well, what's the next level where we can, you know, harness, and where we can't harness machines. But
Excellent. I just have one more question, and then I want to open up the floor to just give you a chance to, if there's some specific pet topic that you would really like to talk about. But I'd like to get your advice. If you and let's talk, Barbara, like if you were talking to a linguist or a project manager or somebody in an organization who has, you know, overall responsibility for their content creation and localization, those 3 individuals, where do you go to up your game and keep aware of what the latest industry trends are? I mean, obviously we can do events like this, but I mean, this is an hour, this is 90 minutes, and it's definitely not enough. What are the, you know, go-to events, organizations, papers? I mean, I mentioned the white paper that Regina co-authored earlier. I mean, where do you look, Barbara, or what would you recommend?
Well, I always encourage our own teams within Acolad in life sciences to stay up with regulation, to understand the customer's environment and the landscape, where servicing our customer much better when we understand what their challenges are and what they're facing, so that we can think about how to adjust our approach to better service them and better support them. So that would be the first place, is understand the customer's environment, which means starting with regulation. And always keep in mind that at the end of the day, you're providing life-saving services. And that requires vigilance, accuracy, and transparency. And so stay aware, stay abreast, and listen to your customers.
So a lot of customer interaction, and that's really important. What if you are working at a large enterprise? You know, one of your customers, and you know, your customers will have internal linguists. They have project managers who this is their responsibility. You know, are there any industry events or organizations, associations that are, you know what, you should be aware of these, or you should participate in? Anything that you'd like to kind of mention?
Yeah, there are tons. The leading pharma event is DIA. DIA has many, they have their global conference, both in the US and in Europe, and they have many educational programs throughout the year. I'm actually at a DAA conference here in Florida this week on medical communications. And so professionals in pharma should take advantage of the information that's out there that's available through DIA. On the med device side, there are many conferences and events that you could attend on the med device side. There's packaging and labeling conference. There isn't anything like DIA on the med device side, but there's plenty of professional forums that you could learn a lot, and that's what we use to stay informed and stay abreast of what's of interest. What are the going trends in our industry?
Excellent.
Don't want to be so focused on localization that we don't know what's going on with our customers.
Got to know what's going on yeah, it's very helpful. Regina, is there any great information sources that that you leverage to kind of keep abreast of what's going on in the industry?
Yeah, so in addition to DIA, and I attended a DIA conference last month, so that's me. Drug Information Association. I'm actually paying a lot of attention right now to CDISC, which I could type it in the chat for spelling. It is a standards organization for data. They're creeping into content as well, because the line of content and data, but narrative, and they have some controlled terminologies and vocabularies. They have data standards for exchange of information, and looking at ICH. And again, I can follow up with these. ICH has several initiatives. It's the International Committee on Harmonization. It's a big, long name, but it is about developing standards and structures for data and content for the full industry. Transcelerate is another group that is an industry working group in pharma, developing templates and standards and things for information. So you can see where I look at. And then outside of the life sciences bucket, I'm involved in a lot of structured content. I've been doing structured content for 25, 30 years. I don't even want to say how many years. So in other industries. So we have some really good conferences, and I don't know if I should name them or not, but I can follow up with people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a conference called Convex from the Center of Information Development and Management, and that usually happens in the spring. And another famous one is LavaCon, which is named LavaCon because it was founded in Hawaii, but it is no longer in Hawaii, which is another place where a lot of structured content, component-based content, the tools vendors are there. Barbara, I'm sure you and I have talked to each other there. There a lot of focus on all the aspects that are the content, interoperability, structure, standards. So keeping abreast of the technologies and best practices on content management, side by side with the unique concerns of pharma and other highly regulated. I mean, aerospace and finance have similar, financial services have some similar requirements, not the same.
Awesome.
But
that's very helpful. It's funny because I've spoken with you before, Regina, and we had Barbara on the memoQ Talks podcast. And every time Barbara would answer a question, I would get like 5 more questions in my head, because it's just like there's so much information, and it's so helpful. And I've again taken like a page of notes just listening to you. We're going to go to the QA here in the Q&A session in about 2 minutes. Any parting thoughts in terms of, hey guys, this is something that you need to be aware of, or this is something really cool, or just something that you want to talk about? Barbara, do you have anything?
Yeah, one of our salespeople likes to advise our clients to crawl, walk, run. And I think this is true, or a good approach, because when you look at implementing structured content, I talk about what I dream about, that quality, technical documentation, instructions for use, all of this information and data could be managed in a more efficient, streamlined manner through structured content management. But it's a heavy lift. So if you think about it in terms of crawl, walk, run, it's easier to approach. Let's start with labeling, and then let's expand from there and look at where structured content could provide greater and broader solutions across a customer organization.
Some great advice. Thank you. Regina, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, on top of that, it's come up a few times, the change management and getting people united as much as people can be in the beginning with a vision. That this is a thing we do. We come in and we look at current state, we develop a vision, we develop a roadmap, so that, and the transparency, I think Barbara, you were mentioning the transparency, every step along the way. What are we going to do? What are the benefits of doing that? And then the next build, and then the next piece, and the next piece, so that we don't have medical writers all around the world going, well, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? And where am I reusing? And what is this? And how are we? And maybe I'll just go open a Word document over here and write something separately. Will they notice? So not that medical writers would do that, but so that communication and helping people all along the way make a pretty big mindset shift that then feeds into the new tools and ways of doing things. But also take heart that this has been done. We as an industry, we have methodologies, we have technology, we have experts in this. So pharma companies and med device companies, nobody has to do this alone. There's a lot of help out there with experience to solve these problems with you, and then leave you in a better place.
Yeah, I've seen it many times that oftentimes if you bring in an external subject matter expert, they can be the kind of initiator of change in a more effective manner than if you have different people in the same organization kind of guesstimating best practices when you don't really have that experience. And in both of you work kind of there's overlap in what you do, but you work on slightly different parts of the content creation and localization kind of chain. Obviously it'd be pretty valuable to have you guys come in and talk to anybody that's looking to implement these type of processes.
So we have Barbara is asking, as a linguist, I sometimes find style or terminology inconsistencies affecting the source text. If I flag them during the translation process, is it still useful, or is it somehow too late as the documents are already being translated in many different languages?
It is absolutely useful. We should definitely give that feedback to your customer, or if you're working with a language service provider, to your language service provider, so that they can give the feedback to their customer. It's an opportunity to improve the source. That source is going to live on beyond that translation project and will be updated. And so absolutely give that feedback and improve that.
And as someone working upstream to help get that terminology consistent and correct in the source, please feed it back up, because that is a concrete example for people to see why it's important to follow the terminology standards, to develop terminology standards, and then follow them up front. Every time you cause a linguist to query something, you know, there may be a delay, or there may be an expense, or there may be, even worse, a fuzzy meaning that people don't know what it means in the source, and then it comes down. So for linguists to keep an eye on this and send that feedback back is so important.
Okay. Any other advice on this topic you would like to share? Or if not, I'm going to the next question. Nodding. This time it's next question. So it's Miklos asking, how do you deal with subcomponent level delta management to leverage existing translations? Do you recommend delta management done on the CMS side, or rather leave it for the translation memories to deal with it?
Well, I would think that it would be best to deal with it on the CMS side, because that is your, I hate to use this term, single source of truth.
So yeah, I agree with Barbara. The more you can manage in the source, the better. But this is saying to leverage existing translations. So one of the drivers for many companies, not necessarily in life sciences so far, has been, if we can get very consistent, very structured with our source content, then the translation memory will help you not have to retranslate the whole document every time. I know there are regulatory concerns here where, Barbara, you would definitely speak to that better than I will, on what triggers a whole new review, or a whole new, at least a review of a translation, just because one little subcomponent changed.
Right, but, and we tend to lock down, you know, segments that are not affected by change, just so that we can manage that review cycle and alert the reviewers that they don't have to review this. If we're generating a full document for the reviewer to review, then we definitely want to lock down and alert them to what they should be reviewing and what they should not be reviewing for regulatory purposes, because we don't want, the reviewers can be just can make arbitrary changes if they don't, and then we're out of compliance because we're changing content that was already approved.
Right.
It's important to know what's changing and what's not changing for both the linguists and the reviewers. And for that reason, I think it would be good to manage that through the CMS.
I think so. And there's a good, a full enterprise grade component content management system that has a good translation localization manager built in, or I think some of the tools, it's an add-on because not everyone translates, but will manage from the source. They can go, okay, these components within that, whatever, within that USPI, these components changed, but the other components were reused, they were already approved, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to put together our localization job of just what changed and send it along. Or if you need the full context, as Barbara, you were saying, it'll go along to the localization process with that content locked. If somebody happens to glance up and see something, they can always query it, but we won't have that very human tendency to get in there and start tweaking when it's not fully necessary. Even if the tweak makes it better by some standard, if it's good enough and it's approved and locked already, we don't need to be re-translating it. You can mark it for an update next time, if there's a next time.
I would like to hear your thoughts in terms of how best to manage in-country review or augmented review, both in terms of, you know, the people, the process, and the tools that you use. Because, you know, we've all heard the horror stories where company will just send it off to their office in Korea, and a random marketing person will be assigned with, hey, check this Korean this Korean language document. They're not a subject matter expert. They're you know, then they're not using tools, and it's not secure. So what are some of the best practices for people, process, and technology for in-country or augmented review?
That's a big topic.
Don't do it. Oh wait, is that not?
We do all sorts of things. We've tried to move our customers to a review process that has them only reviewing what's necessary, and even only reviewing content that's for, let's say, a new product intro or new countries, new languages, because the review process can be so problematic and time consuming and can also introduce risk. It requires that we do a review analysis of what the reviewers are changing to make sure that they're not changing things inappropriately. And so in order to manage that risk, there are a lot of different things that we've recommended to customers depending on their situation to get a better handle on that review process. And so in terms of process, we try to understand, is it a new product intro? Is it a new language? Have we had issues or comments from the field for that language or that country that would necessitate a full review? Can we do a limited review? Can we just review Delta? Can we adjust the review process basically for the circumstances? That's one. So the process is highly adjustable based on what the requirements are for that product or that project or that customer. In terms of technology, it helps if we can highlight to the customer, if we're giving them the full document, the fully generated document, let's say from the CMS, we want to be able to show them what is new and what's the delta, what is new and what's been approved before, so that they're not wasting time on content that doesn't need to be reviewed. If we can pull out just the segments that are new for that delta, then we'll send that to review. We have post-processed, let's say, and created review templates for the customer to make it easier in a table format to get them out of the business of recommending formatting and let's change this color and, you know, things that they shouldn't be focused on. We've also tried educating reviewers on this is what we need you to do and not this. So there are lots and lots of different things that we've done with both process and technology and education to try to eliminate the pain around in-country review. And it's all based on the customer's requirements and situation.
Excellent. Regina, you were nodding your head. Did you want to add anything to that?
I'm learning too as we go. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea. But partly I know that, again, as I was saying before, having the content standards, the structures, the content strategy, all of that set, it gives people something outside of people and opinions to point to and say, all right, well, does this follow our foundational principles? Does this follow? And we try to be flexible. You know, we know that as soon as you come up with standards, there's an exception. Right. So we plan for things like that. But this is about helping things fit together smoothly and making the content and the data and the information be fair principles, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable everywhere. So we're looking at that, and that also can help people understand why not to go reviewing pieces that are already approved, or you know, it's a little different because I'm working more with source than with in-country.
Sure.
But yeah.
Okay, well, it's very helpful, and I mean, a couple key takeaways today is, one, do some kind of mapping to know what content you have, where it's at, where it's being created. Understand the processes and see if you can optimize them, either by changing the process or using the right tools. And then whenever possible, creating some type of, was it a policy document or basically standards document that can be this kind of, reference or touchstone. So we don't have to kind of make it up on the fly. And it's not my opinion or your opinion. It's, this is what we've all agreed to, and here's the standards that we're going to adapt. And I think if you're listening to this or watching this, those are maybe three of the most important takeaways.
So here we are. It's, do you think that review editing of source, especially when written in English by non-mother tongue English, sorry, something is missing. No, it's by non-mother tongue English important? That's the question posted.
Yes. And I think that might be to me, because I may have accidentally implied that I thought the review wasn't important. Yes, it is important. I think when we're talking about it, is planning it in, helping reviewers know what to review and what to look for, not be re-reviewing previously approved content in, the same source. And also the casual process of, hey, you speak that language, will you look at this? Right. That is not secured and not tracked and is not a sustainable, not a best practice. And I'm certain that never happens in life sciences. Barbara can probably assure me on that. But yes, I do agree that it's important for all, whether it's written by a non-native speaker of the source language or written by a native speaker of the source language. Yeah.
And it is often part of our standard process to do a linguistic analysis prior to starting translation, not necessarily because we doubt it's been written by an English native, but we try to identify where there might be issues in the English that is hard to translate. And if we're going into 32 languages, we don't want to get 32 questions. And so we try to clarify all of that ahead of time, and if necessary, go back to the customer so that they can adjust the English source if they need to. They may not be aware that there is a problem with the English source.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I think, well, one, like I said, I've taken a full page of notes. I don't know if you can see, actually a page and a half. There's a lot of great information you shared. Really would like to thank Barbara and Regina for your time and the information you've shared. Also, Ulrich, thank you for the Q&A session. I'd like to thank Sandor and Fricke, who are the puppet masters who've set this platform up and kind of helped us organize this event. And just the last thing is a reminder that memoQ will be at gala in San Diego, more sunshine and palm trees, in a couple of weeks. Okay, so if anybody's around and would like to just say hi or learn more about what we talked about today or anything else, please do stop by our booth, and I plan on being there as well. So with that, thanks you everybody, and we will be doing another one of these conversations in about 2.5, 3 months from now. So thank you.
Great.
Thank you too. Bye-bye.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.